From the Foundation Studio right here on Biloxi's Back Bay, welcome to another special edition of Super Talk Outdoors, where we celebrate every single Monday at lunchtime the world-class outdoors of the state of Mississippi. I say it just about every week, but Mississippi is the capital of the outdoors in the United States. There is no doubt about that, from the incredible saltwater fishing in the backwaters and offshore of our coast to the Mississippi Delta, to the hills of northeast Mississippi. Man, are we lucky to live here. And I always kind of say this, too, that if you're visiting here, y'all come back soon. As I always do, I want to thank my friend Steve Azar, the singer-songwriter, the music and cultural ambassador for the state of Mississippi, for enabling us to use that song, One Mississippi, this theme song for Super Talk Outdoors. By the way, One Mississippi has a really, really good chance of becoming the state song for Mississippi in the next legislative session. So you got to look it up on YouTube, and I think you'll see why. Steve wrote a song called I Don't Have to Be Me Till Monday. And that song peaked at #2 on the U.S. Billboard Hot Country Singles and Tracks chart. It was his highest peaking single. He had a bunch more. But there's a line in that song, I don't have to be me till Sunday, that goes like this. So I called in to where I work, told a little white lie. No, my back don't really hurt, but that's my alibi. My temporary ticket to anywhere but there. I think that expresses what a lot of people across Mississippi feel when they get off work or find a way to get off work and get into the outdoors, man. We're so fortunate here. I want to thank you for joining us on the powerful Super Talk Mississippi Network. And if you're listening on Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast, it's November the 29th, 2021. So look, my son, Just Jordan, and his friend Leland Dunning went to Horn Island over the weekend. They fished in 36-degree weather, but they caught some redfish and specks. But look, I'm not a big, go offshore in the cold weather kind of guy. But they enjoyed it. And what that means for us here at the Matthews house is that we'll be cooking fish tonight. One other comment about Biloxi's Back Bay. People in the north Mississippi who don't come here during the winter, you should. And what you would see is the water is absolutely crystal clear. Think Key West and think clarity. And that's what the water looks like this time of year. Redfish and specks are starting to show up in the backwaters of coastal Mississippi. It's really a great time of the year. Let me bring my friend Kyle Curley, the producer of the show, in real quick. And first of all, just say good morning, Kyle. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Thanks for all you do for Super Talk Outdoors and for my show Coast View down here on the coast. I love watching you because you and your son really love to fish. And you guys had a really good trip this past weekend, didn't you?
Yeah, we finally were able to go. We were supposed to go a few weeks back, but it was that first real big cold snap where it went from 60 degrees one day to 34 the next day, and it was that quick sudden drop in temperature. And our boat captain, Paul Leone at Southern Comfort, really come out of the box and was really up front and forward. He said, it's going to be really hard to get fish to bite with the temperature dropping the way it did. So we ultimately decided to postpone it, and we were going to go this past Saturday. And then, of course, looked at the weather, and it's going to get cold again. So we're texting over the whole Thanksgiving holiday, and he goes, you know what, I think we should just go at noon instead of first thing in the morning, give temperature, room to bounce up. So we went out Saturday afternoon, great fishing trip. We didn't have near the sunshine that we thought we were going to get. It was a little bit chilly, but you know what? You get out on a boat and you go out 20, 30 minutes south and you find some speckled trout and some redfish and some big sheep's head. We had a really good time. We found a little pond right there at the end. We were about to pack it up, and I hooked into what I figured was going to be a big redfish, and I passed it off to my son because that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to catch something big. He had a great day all day catching specks, him and his buddy. And, the buddy that he brought with him, Cameron Sandel, this kid had a weekend. He got a 10-point or an 8-point on Friday, went fishing with us Saturday, and then we finished the trip off. Desi reeled in that huge redfish. I think it was 38 inches. We never weighed it, but we're going to get it mounted. So yeah, it's going to be,
Cal, look, the reason why I have spent so much time and energy on my fishing habit and on hunting up in the Delta has been, to bring my sons back. One son's in New York, and he came back. He spent the week with me there last week, and we were together just enjoying the outdoors together. But, man, I mean, there's nothing – I mean, is there anything about life that's better than spending time in the outdoors with your family, man?
No, there really wasn't. My wife come with us, and she caught a few speckled trout. She kind of says she only caught one, but she really caught 3 or 4. She had a great time. Both kids had a great time. It was probably the best fishing trip we could have ever had, regardless of the weather.
Wow, that's so cool. I look forward to you and your son coming over and fishing with me very soon, actually, and we'll share how that went on a future Super Talk Outdoors. So thank you, buddy. I appreciate it, man.
You bet.
So, hey, now we're going to move to a very special guest today. His name is Bronson Strickland. He's a Ph.D. You probably know him from Deere University, his podcast, if you're a whitetail deer enthusiast like I am. And before we go any further, let me just say welcome, Bronson. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Look forward to talking to you.
Yeah, we're going to spend time talking about the Mississippi State University Extension Service and what they're doing and this incredible research you've been doing for many, many, many years. But I want to start with this. I was doing some research over the weekend. I wanted to see what some famous people thought about the outdoors and sort of putting things into perspective around some of the more notable historic figures in America. And I came across some quotes. And I want to read one to you, and I think it's gonna spur some conversations between the two of us. I'll tell you who it's by when I get done reading the quote. Here it is. In a civilized and cultivated country, wild animals only continue to exist at all when preserved by sportsmen. The excellent people who protest against all hunting and consider sportsmen as enemies of wildlife are ignorant in the fact that in reality the genuine sportsman is by all odds the most important factor in keeping the larger and more valuable wild creatures from total extermination. That was Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president of the United States. And he went on, man, this guy put his energy and his passion where his mouth was by creating the national park system in America. 230 million acres of parks and monuments and forests and wild refuges. I mean, it's incredible. But, boy, that's an incredible statement that he said it when he said it. And look where we are today. So it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't know is that Teddy Roosevelt, it came at a very critical time, and it usually takes a few critical people to be movers and shakers to get things going. Teddy Roosevelt, what was that person? He actually was one of the founding fathers, I guess you could say, of North America's oldest conservation organization. And a lot of people don't know that North America's oldest conservation organization is the Boone and Crockett Club.
Wow. Yeah.
And so it was their engagement in the outdoors and watching these animals like white-tailed deer, black bear, elk, etc., almost becoming extinct in many places and certainly extirpated in a lot of the eastern U.S. They were the ones that said, hey, we got to stop. We've got to do something. And first and foremost, we have to start protecting habitat, which you see like you mentioned, with the Park Service and so forth. And then after that, slowly beginning what we call the North American model of wildlife conservation, which uses hunting dollars and for fish populations, fishing dollars to go back into the system to manage these lands, manage the wildlife, etc. That was the beginning and what we have today.
And you're a professional member of the Boone and Crockett Club.
I am. We're actually having our annual meeting later this week in New Orleans.
Okay, so here's another one. This is going to be fun because you love the outdoors and you love management and love the culture of hunting. So here's a really good one. The only reason I ever played golf in the first place was so I could afford to hunt and fish. That was Sam Snead that said that. So that you can relate, can't you, Bronson?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and that's just one of the parts of hunting. It does take time. You have to avail yourself to get out there, and sometimes you have to have some money, some dollars, especially if you're going to go out of state and chase an elk or something like that. So, yeah.
One of my best friends who hunts and fishes with me, his name is Terry Waldrop, and I never will forget this. Many years ago, he was being given a promotion, and he told his boss, he said, look, I'll take the promotion, but you never forget this. The only reason I work is to be able to put gas in my boat. I just never forgot it. I never forgot it. Hey, listen, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Bronson Strickland. He is, he's a very passionate outdoorsman, and he's done a lot of incredible research around the white-tailed deer. So anyway, from the Foundation Studio right here on Biloxi's Back Bay, we'll see you when we get back from break.
Mississippi.
Leading the conversation on Mississippi's outdoors. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Mississippi.
From the Foundation Studio right here on Biloxi's Back Bay, I'm thrilled today to have Dr. Bronson Strickland, and we're going to continue the conversation. He's a whitetail expert. He's an expert about all kinds of things involving the wildlife. Hey, before we go any further, I just want to say that the Foundation, as I say, I'm doing this show from the Foundation Studio. It's the Foundation for Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, not to be confused with the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. This is a group of dedicated volunteers from all over the state whose sole purpose it is to raise money. And I might also add that they get involved in the issues from time to time, and when they do really grasp an issue, probably ought to look out, because they're extraordinarily well-connected organization and have done some amazing work together. But what they do is they collect money, the foundation does, and then they help fill gaps in the department. And they also are involved in other programs involving hunter education in general, involving our kids in the outdoor. But I'm really thrilled to be associated with the foundation. They're really a good organization. Okay, so anyway, coming back to Dr. Bronson Strickland, let's do this. I got a couple of other quotes I want to read. We were reading famous outdoors quotes by people. Here's another one. I don't always tell people where I hunt, but when I do, it's a lie. And that's the most interesting man in the world, Dosa Keys, who said that. Just a kind of a little funny joke there, but boy.
That sounds like a turkey hunter.
It does, doesn't it? It sounds like some of the white-tailed deer guys that I hunt with, for sure. Here's another one. I don't know who said it, but I read this to my wife this morning, and we chuckled together. My biggest fear is that when I die, my wife will sell my hunting gear for what I said I paid for it. That's true,
Yeah.
isn't it, man?
Yeah, for a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of the guns and archery equipment is not very cheap.
And scopes. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, it
And
goes
scopes-
on and on. Yeah.
That scope's gotten so advanced. Here's another one from a famous guy. I'm proud to have been born in Iowa. Through the eyes of a 10-year-old boy, it was a place of adventure and daily discoveries. The wonders of the growing crops, the excitements of the harvest, the journeys to the woods for nuts and hunting, the joys of snowy winters, the comfort of family fireside, a good food and tender care. That was Herbert Hoover, the 31st president of the United States, who had a deep love for the outdoors. That kind of brings it all into focus. I mean, being in the outdoors is not always about the shooting, but it's just about the overall experience. Isn't that true?
Well, we often say too, it's more of a lifestyle, because it's more than just hunting. It's managing the land and managing the wildlife. It's a total engagement type of experience. Those are the people that get the most out of it.
Two more. This one here is a stanza from a song. Because you can't starve us out and you can't make us run, because we're them old boys raised on a shotgun. And we say grace and we say ma'am, and if you ain't into that, we don't give a damn. Hank Williams Jr. and his song, A Country Boy Can Survive. Incidentally, my great uncle, R.D. Nard, played steel guitar with Hank Williams' Drifting Cowboys. Kind of a little side note there. But you know what? Mississippians get the outdoors, don't they?
Well, yeah, it's one of those states too where we often say some people may think of this negatively. We're more of a rural state, but I absolutely love and cherish that we're a more rural state because we have a great deal of opportunity that people in other states don't have.
Yeah, we really do. As I said, we're the capital of outdoors in the United States, and I will stand by that. That's going to be the theme of this show. And one other was from a great person. Through almost all human existence, huntable land and huntable wildlife have preceded the hunter. They caused the hunter. But in the future, this must be reversed. And it is the hunter who must cause huntable land and wildlife and a world worth being young in. And what's interesting about that quote is it was said in the 1600s by John Madison, the great-grandfather of President James Madison. It's interesting that back in those days, they were already beginning to get that man was going to have a role in creating this incredible outdoors that we're able to enjoy today.
Well, I think they started seeing that as, quote, human progress and what we were doing to the land, and for very reasonable purposes back then, for agriculture and building and housing and so forth. We were simultaneously destroying wildlife habitat. And so humans are going to have to take a very decided and active role in protecting habitat if we were going to have wildlife populations.
And boy, did they. But as you pointed out a few minutes ago, so it's a few really, really visionary people who along the way could see, I mean, they didn't have the benefit of the internet or, high-speed travel. I mean, it really is quite amazing that they were able to consume what needed to be done to protect the U.S.
Yeah, and they were very bold about doing it. It took some very strong personalities and people with a lot of political credit, so to speak, to make it happen. And fortunately for everyone, it worked. Probably better than they envisioned. It worked.
Hey, I'll close on this one. This is Earl Dibbles Jr. He's a singer-songwriter. He said, if God wanted us to be vegetarians, he would have made broccoli more fun to shoot.
And deer not taste so good.
Right, and deer not taste so good. Yeah, I had a great experience this past weekend. I was able to harvest a deer that we called the swamp donkey deer. It was there's a 100-acre cypress lake on the land that we have, and there's this great food plot that goes along it and regrowth of corn that actually has corn cobs on it. And we call that the North Lake stand. And this old 7-point came out in broad daylight and turns broadside. So my son Justin, who was down from New York, and I really enjoyed tracking that deer and retrieving it. And then we brought it over to BB's, which is a deer processing place over in Greenwood. And while we were there, we backed up. And, Charlotte and BB, just terrific people. When we backed up, another guy pulls up, and he's got a truck and a trailer and a 4-wheeler on the trailer and an 8-point on the 4-wheeler. And a father and a son gets out. And the son, probably my guess, is 8 or 9 years old. And it reminded me of when I used to take my sons to a fishing tournament, and they would have a big fish, and they couldn't wait to get to the weigh scale. But this kid had just killed his first buck. And dude, the look on his face, the love that father and son had for each other is sort of like what I had with both of my sons when they killed their first buck. But it's in that moment that you realize, my God, we just said, what a fine buck. It was probably a 2-year-old 8-point. It didn't matter. He was so excited. To me, that's what the outdoors is all about, having that experience. You've seen that many times, haven't you?
Oh, I've seen it and I've lived it. I mean, probably the best feeling I've ever had was my first buck, a 6-pointer. Probably a yearling buck, way back when, but I cannot tell you, and for someone like me, it's one of those kind of life-changing experiences.
Yeah. Okay. So look, I mentioned to you that I had the opportunity about 5 years ago to lease some land. The initial land that we leased between Black Hawk and Greenwood was 500 acres in the hills, 500 acres in the Delta. And it had just been, you could say select cut, but really mostly clear cut, left some some fruit-bearing trees, acorn-bearing trees along the sides of some of the really more treacherous hills. But it was a mess. I had to go in. I spent a lot of money, rebuilding roads and creating food plots and all the stuff that you do to get this thing going. But it was a great experience. And what I wanted to tell you was that in those early days, because here I'm a coast boy, while I've hunted up near the Delta and in the Delta for many years, I've never had responsibility for managing a piece of property. So I decided in my retirement to go to school on managing a piece of property. I studied everything I could get my hands on, and I especially studied what you had to say, because the research that you and your partner have done over the many years has really been incredible. It helped me see, while in the early days of that land, it was kind of ugly, and when you're talking about the hills, this heavy equipment that goes in to take the logging operation out, man, it can just tear up land. And I had to see that really what I was looking at was future deer habitat second to none, is what I had to come to understand. And it's you that helped me understand that. We went in and walked every square inch of that property. We laid it out in a very specific kind of way, made it easy to get to the stands so we could not interrupt the situation as much as possible. And you informed us. And do you hear people talk about, well, I'll tell you what, we're coming to the end of this segment. When we come back on the other side, I want to hear what you hear about how your research and your passion for informing people have informed people, and how the stories that you've heard over the many years. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Bronson Strickland, who is a Ph.D. and a wildlife expert, particularly the white-tailed deer. We'll come back after this break.
Mississippi, where a mockingbird sings out on his limb, whistling that sweet soul for him. I said 3 Mississippi to this land called home. I'll breathe Mississippi till I'm dead and gone. Just carry on, I'll carry on. Walls and fall football, a Gulf Coast sunset and a Delta dawn.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I have Dr. Bronson Strickland. You probably know him well from Deer University. He's with Mississippi State University Extension Service. He's a wildlife and really white-tailed deer specialist. He's done some amazing research. Hey, when we went to break, I was mentioning how much you impacted me in the management of the land that I have, that I have the benefit of managing the wildlife on. You have really impacted a lot of people along the way, haven't you?
Well, thank you very much. We certainly hope to have, and that was our goal. And, I have to mention Steve Damaris. He's co-director of the MSU Deer Lab and a friend, a colleague, a mentor. But something we decided about a decade ago was that we wanted to jump out there and take advantage of these new platforms that maybe some other people weren't taking advantage of. And it's for the purpose, Ricky, that you just mentioned, is how can we maximize our outreach opportunities by doing so. And so, with video, with social media, with podcasts, et cetera, and of course the traditional writing, publications, books. But we have definitely noticed that we're reaching and engaging with more people and getting a lot more feedback because of that.
Yeah, it is. It's so important. In my case, the people who had this land, leased this land before me, you've heard the old phrase "brown and down."
Oh yeah.
But unfortunately, that's the way it was. I came to understand as a result of what you taught us that it won't take long if we can just set some standards. Of course, the clear cut was going to create incredible browse for the deer. Do really first class food plots that things would kind of take care of themselves if we were willing to manage the herd appropriately. And here we are 5 years into this, and I showed you some pictures earlier, but yeah. There's some incredible deer on our property. It doesn't take long if you stay focused, does it?
It doesn't. And the one thing, you haven't explicitly said this, but from what I'm understanding, what happened is you started getting more deer to spend more time on your property. You likely did not have a food limitation because of all the agriculture around there. You had a cover limitation.
Yeah.
And so by thinning the forest and certainly clear cutting parts of it, is that you created a bunch of cover, like we say, from waist down or from shoulder down. And a lot of people neglect that. A lot of people just want to focus on the soybeans or the clover, and that's very, very important. But if you want to keep deer on your property, they have to feel secure. And providing those areas of cover is going to do that. And just so you know, when I visit properties in the Delta, that's typically the most often limiting factor I see, is they don't have spots of very well-developed cover to hold deer throughout the year.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest change we've seen, is that where before bucks would just show up on camera and we're not sure where they came from. Now we see bucks that are kind of there year round. I mean, obviously when they don't have antlers, we don't know for sure, but over time we've been able to see we've got a lot of resident deer. But what's interesting to me is the work that you guys have done with your collars. And some deer will venture way off and some deer will stay pretty much resident. You've gotten a lot of feedback from that research, haven't you?
We have, yeah. And I wish we had answers for exactly why they demonstrate this behavior. We're still trying to tease that apart, but you can kind of break it down like this. About a third of the bucks are what we call homebodies. They have an affinity for a spot. They're just this traditional, they got about 1,000 acres and that's where they're going to live and die. We've got about another third that throughout the year, it might be month by month or from the pre-rut they kind of overlap. There'll be a little bit of a shift. They might, the center of their activity may shift half a mile away or a mile away. And then we've got some that it's almost like it's a migratory behavior. It's before the rut or something like that, they're going to pick up and move 10 to 15 miles away and spend the next 3 months or 4 months and then pick up and move back. And we really don't have an answer for that. We tend to think that maybe it's just a behavior that's within some deer that they just want to explore. The grass is always greener, and they're just going to pick up and move around and explore and try to find new places. But it really resonates, Ricky, when you talk about feedback we've gotten over the years, as we would hear that from hunters, is all of a sudden I used to get this buck, photos of it every single day, and then it's gone. Never got a photo again. Or all of a sudden on October 15th every year, I get photos of this buck again. And we didn't really understand what was going on. Frankly, I thought a lot of times, I think the batteries in your camera were bad, because that's just not reasonable. But sure enough, when you put a tracking device on some of these bucks, they will pick up and move and be gone, and 6 months later come back.
That explains, just our own experience. We have what we call the resident buck. He's just always there. We watch him over the years. And then we have a deer that maybe appears, but then he hangs out there for a while. But then sometimes we have a deer we've never seen before. It just like Bruiser, is locked down in the middle of an ag field somewhere, and we don't know where he came from or which deer it is. But that's part of you can do a lot with cameras. You can really test your population. It helps you manage your population for sure. It helps you in your hunting. But there's always going to be this mystery attached to it, and that's what makes it fun.
That's what makes it fun. Yeah, you want there to be some excitement and surprise when you hunt. And some of these excursions, like you were referring to, Ricky, some of these, earlier I was talking about there was a shift, and they pick a new location and they'll set up there for a month or 2 months or whatever. Some of these are just 3-day excursions. All of a sudden, this pre-rut or rut, a buck shows up, he's there for a few days and it's gone. Mm-hmm. But that's what makes it exciting.
I was listening to the Speak the Language podcast the other day, and Brad Ferris was on it. He was talking about some new land that he has now, and that he manages. And it's interesting to hear someone like Brad, because Brad's been deer hunting professionally and as a hobby for many, many, many years, and he's doing land management now. But what's interesting about what he said is how focused he is on not creating pressure. Even during the off season, where he's willing to bring a four-wheeler, and where it's not just during hunting season. He is just he's like hyper focused on, he said, you may fool a 2 or 3 year old buck. You're not going to fool a truly mature buck, 4 or 5, 6 year old buck. You got to be always aware 365 days a year of how that pressure might impact him. He's right to be sensitive about that, isn't he?
Very much so. And that's some examples of our research is pretty conclusive on that. Is in one study, it took about 3 days. But when there was a lot of hunter activity on this landscape for about 3 days, deer are still always going to move. You know, a lot of people think the deer, quote, aren't moving. Deer are going to move. It just might be a difference in how they move and how far they move and what time of day they move. But a deer's got to eat every day. It's going to get up and it's going to find food. But what we find is that their pattern of behavior will change. And they didn't get to be, some of these bucks, 6 years old from being dumb. They know how to avoid hunters. And so I completely agree. The more that you can limit that, the better off you're going to be.
And look, for South Mississippians who like maybe hunt in Stone County or maybe northern Harrison County, we know our deer to be smaller in stature. Certainly their antlers are not as big. But your whole concept of epigenetics has really changed the way we look at that from a genetic point of view, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully it should give everyone the hope and the confidence that management will work in that region as well. And again, just briefly, what we showed is that it's intergenerational nutrition, meaning it's not just the nutrition, a change in nutrition 1 year, it's the nutrition that your mother had and your grandmother had, that it more or less, and I'm oversimplifying here, but it kind of turns on genes, or genes can be expressed more fully once a mother has sent the signals to a developing fawn or a fetus that there's an abundance of food or there's a limitation of food. That changes the expression for genes for body size and antler size.
It's really incredible. And the way you did it, you took pregnant does from all over the state, brought them into a single location. Tell the rest of that story.
Yeah, so you brought them into a single location. They had their fawns. Now, most people would think if you give a Delta fawn and a lower coastal plain fawn the same nutrition, at that point, they're going to grow to 3 or 4 or 5 years of age and be the same size. That's not what we saw. It took one entire generation of being under that good nutrition before we saw those lower coastal plain bucks grow to be just as big as the Delta bucks.
That explains why every now and then this unbelievable giant pops up in coastal Mississippi southern Mississippi. It's because for whatever reason, wherever it was, had a good generational nutrition situation. Hey, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Bronson Strickland, and we'll close out the final segment. We'll see you after this break.
Whistling that sweet soul for him. I said 3 Mississippi to this land called home. I'll breathe Mississippi till I'm dead and gone. Just carry on. I'll carry on. Mississippi.
We live in one of the best places in America to enjoy the outdoors. So let's talk about it. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
It's kudzu walls and fall football, a Gulf Coast sunset.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I have Dr. Bronson Strickland with us. He's a wildlife biologist. He's a white-tailed deer specialist. You may know him from his podcast, Deer University. Really, if you're managing land, or if you're just wanting to understand how to be a better hunter, or how to grow bigger deer, go to Deer University. You'll really get a great appreciation for the amount of time, energy, and research they put into understanding the white-tailed deer. There's so much to talk about as it relates to that. If you look back in time, Bronson, what is the most, earth-shattering research you guys have done besides what we just talked about with the collars?
I guess a couple things. The collar research has been eye-opening. mainly from a perspective of just understanding buck behavior, why they're here and why they're there. And, we think they're gone, but they're not. The epigenetics research, I think, has been, I think we're seeing the effects of that, the ripple effect, even outside of Mississippi, just unlocking what's going on and how important nutrition is. You cannot manage genetics. That's one thing a common misconception. The old statement of, I shot that buck to get it out of the gene pool, that is absolutely false. You're not going to impact the gene pool at all, but what you can impact is nutrition. And that's where you're going to see. We also, it's not as much of an issue now as it was 10 years ago, but what we would call antler restrictions, the pros and cons of a 4-point rule or an 8-point rule, and that's really all there is. There are definitely things that can improve the buck segment of the herd, and there are things that can be negative. So teasing that apart has been really important.
Okay, I was at the store, a little store in the middle of nowhere in Tallahatchie County, where at least one doe was tested to have CWD, and the topic of CWD, chronic wasting disease, came up, and one of the old guys said, "Oh, CWD has always been here. It's really not the problem they say it is." What do you say about that?
I would say, with all due respect, that's incorrect. It is real, and it is really a big deal. The one thing that differs about CWD or chronic wasting disease, is the chronic part. It's not a disease like blue tongue or hemorrhagic disease where you have this severe year or mild year, and there's this immediate and tangible difference. You found dead deer by a pond, by a stream, from Ph.D. If you're outside of Mississippi and go further north, let's say in the Midwest, you may lose 20, 30, 40% of the deer when you have an outbreak of hemorrhagic disease. That is not chronic wasting disease. Chronic wasting disease slowly and slowly and slowly builds. And you go from, Ricky, the big deal is, over time, when you get prevalence rates of 20, 30, 40%, you no longer have a thriving deer population. Why is that important to hunters? When you don't have a thriving deer population, you no longer have a huntable population. So you no longer have that surplus of deer every year that we enjoy and that we can hunt and harvest, because you can't have any more mortality from hunter harvest. You've got to just maintain that population as best you can. So chronic wasting disease is real. We don't think of chronic wasting disease impacts on an annual scale. It's really at the decade scale. And that's why we're really trying to get people educated and engaged with testing so we can figure out where the disease is at. MDWFMP has done a wonderful job. They have put free sampling sites all over the state. I think there's over 30 or 40 sites now distributed throughout where you can drop it off free of charge and get your sample back to know. So it helps you to know, is it on my property or where I hunt? It helps MDWFMP know where the disease is at so we can better manage it and contain it.
So we're doing a good job of sort of understanding where we are. How, in the short time we have left, how's Mississippi doing currently as it relates to managing CWD?
I think we're doing as well as can be expected. It's really difficult to contain because we have normal deer behavior that's difficult. We have yearling bucks that disperse a mile or two or three. There's no way to know externally if they are carrying the disease or not. And so that's a normal part of deer behavior that's going to be difficult. But we can also do some things, some man-made activities to slow the spread. And that's why MDWFMP always mandates that we stop baiting and supplemental feeding in a CWD management zone. We don't want to increase or facilitate the prevalence of the disease that way.
Well, listen, I wish we could go on and on. That's an important point we just made. People should look it up and see what the current management practices are around CWD. And as Bronson pointed out, the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks has done an incredible job of sort of creating these zones so you can understand if your property is in or outside that zone, and what you need to do if you're inside it, and even if you're outside, what you need to do to manage it. So when we until our next conversation, Bronson, and I predict that we'll have you back on soon. Hope you continue to have a good hunting season yourself.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Appreciate the opportunity, Ricky. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for joining us here on Super Talk Outdoors. We'll see you next Monday. Stay safe.